council work session this evening, August 11th, 2020. And so again, we'll call us to order, and I would request the city recorder to do a roll call. So Claudia, if you'd start.
Councillor Drapkin.
Present, and I apologize for being late. I couldn't leave work before I could leave work, and as soon as I could get here.
Councillor Garvin. Councillor Garvin.
So close.
Yeah.
Looks like we lost Adam.
Yeah, I think we lost Councillor Garvin. Mayor, I think we've lost Councillor Garvin.
Okay. Well, I know he was on, so I'm sure he's trying to get back on.
Let me get a hold of him. 1 second. Councillor Drapkin.
Present.
Councillor Garvin.
Present.
Councillor Geary.
Here.
Council President Minke.
Present.
Councillors Stassens and Peralta are absent this evening. Mayor Hill.
Here. And thank you, Claudia, for doing the roll call. This evening, our work session is going to be focused on the fire department's consolidation discussion, and we've got a number of what I would say are distinguished panelists that are going to give us some insights. And so I'll call on Chief Lippert to introduce the topic and our guests. So Rich, if you'd do that.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for the opportunity, but I'll defer that opportunity to Mr. Towery.
Thanks, Chief. I'll say a couple of words and then turn it back over to Rich. I want to thank the panel for joining us tonight. I don't have the pleasure of knowing Tim or George, but I know them by reputation. They are long-serving the state of Oregon in a variety of public service initiatives. I did have the pleasure of working with Rodney Stewart the 9 years that I was at the city of Springfield, and with Chief Groves for most of the 9 years that I was at the city of Springfield. It would not be fair to say that Rodney and I, or Randy and I, agreed with one another all the time. In fact, Rodney and I maybe spent more time problem solving than we did agreeing with one another in our respective roles. I also worked really closely with Chief Groves as the cities of Eugene and Springfield worked to ultimately consolidate their fire services. I was the lead representative from the Springfield City Manager's Office, and Randy ultimately became the first chief of the combined department. I think for the entire time that Rodney and I worked together. Rodney and I sat at the same table, sometimes on opposite sides in a variety of forums. And one of the things that I can say about both Rodney and Randy is that they're professionals, and while they didn't always agree with me or with one another, they were always professional and courteous about the way they went about disagreeing and always looking for solutions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rich to do a little bit of an additional introduction. And I want to again thank the panelists for joining us here tonight.
Mr. Mayor and councilors, this evening we have our panel here to try and help the council understand a little bit about what we're talking about when it comes to consolidation efforts. And each of them brings some of their own varied background, having lived through it, worked through it, had their own successes, had their own challenges. And our goal this evening is to try and pick the brains of some of the folks that have been in Oregon doing this work. And I will allow each of them to give a small introduction about themselves as we roll into them. I'd like to start this evening with George Dunkel with kind of an overview. George's role currently, after he spent, I don't know how many years, George, in the fire service, I'll let you talk on that, but he rolled into special districts as a key partner for those of us that work with districts and in the fire service. And his background is from special districts, and when it comes to this dialogue, and he's helped quite a few districts work through processes, and I'll just start with Mr. Dunkel, and we'll go from there.
All right. Well, thanks, Chief. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And as I told Rich earlier, in 1971, 72, 73, I was a student sleeper volunteer for the McMinnville Fire Department, and to be now sitting before the council in this kind of role is kind of deja vu, and it's really interesting to be here. I'm hesitant to tell you how long I've been involved in the fire services. It makes me sound old. But I had the pleasure of becoming a volunteer firefighter at 18, and I'm now 69. You do the math. And I've had an opportunity to work with fire districts and city fire departments in a variety of roles, both as a volunteer, as a career person that spent 14 years in labor group, and then 14 years in management. And I also spent 25 years as an elected official on a fire district board. Some of those overlapped, but different roles I played. I've been real privileged the last, which is hard to say, the last 15 years to be working with Special District Association of Oregon, which is an association that provides services to all the various types of local governments in Oregon except for cities and counties. We work directly with the smallest little road district to the largest fire or water provider in the state, providing services to them. And then through our SDIS program, much like cities and counties do with city-county insurance, we provide property casualty and liability insurance for those agencies. What I've seen in the Oregon Fire Service throughout my years of participating and observing is that there's been a real trend dating back to really the early 70s, late 60s, of communities looking for a way to provide services, especially fire and emergency services, by providing that through a special service district, meaning a rural fire protection district. We've got many models of that are throughout the state. I have always referred to Yamhill County up until recently with the merger of I guess I'd consider it a merger of City of Newburgh into Tualatin Valley, as the Yamhill version of the model was cities contracting with, rural fire districts to provide services to a bigger area provided by the city. Both McMinnville and Newburgh were doing that type of service for a long time. So it was a model that I always shared with people around the state that was successful to a certain extent. The move by cities, and I'll go back to the pre-1970s, there's been a move by cities to look for ways to provide a level of emergency services, mainly fire and medical, by other means, either to a bigger area, and they've done that through annexations, mergers, and consolidations into rural fire protection districts. There are all kinds of examples, and with the late start, I'm not going to bore you with the list I had, but there are, if you look at the history of the fire service in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and even today, there's a lot of people having the types of discussions that you're having. Just to kind of bring you up to speed, to skip ahead, we have activity going on in the state of Oregon right now that we've either been directly or indirectly involved in that involves agencies in Umatilla County, Morrow County, Columbia County, Polk County, Yamhill County, Josephine County, Jefferson County, Lincoln County, Union County, and Lane County, as well as you may be familiar with the city of Forest Grove and what's going on in Western Washington County. So there's a lot of activity in this area of how to provide improved services or maintain services to a bigger area from a regional perspective. And the way you're looking at it with the city perhaps annexing into the rural district or doing some form of consolidation that forms a new district is definitely a viable option and one that's being evaluated in numerous areas throughout the state. We've seen, and looking back, we've seen some districts and cities that have gone together that had some difficulties in the early stages. Most of those difficulties, in fact, all the ones that I'm familiar with, have worked themselves out. So if you were to ask me the question, have mergers, consolidations, and cities receiving service from a rural fire protection district, have they benefited the taxpayers and have the service levels improved? I would generally say yes. I don't know of any examples where things degraded. We've had some potential mergers and consolidations that didn't happen or haven't happened yet because of some of the roadblocks that were put up and some of the personalities involved. And actually, when they looked at some of the feasibility of some of those, it just didn't make financial sense. One of the biggest pitfalls we've seen with cities, especially that have moved forward and helped form a rural fire district that the city became part of, is how they dealt with any existing debt. Existing debt for a new district can be a daunting issue when you're trying to provide service and you have either, capital debt or PERS debt or some kind of debt out there that all of a sudden the whole thing tries to get transferred to the new district. So that is something to be aware of as a potential problem. Other areas that we've seen where agencies have had, let's say, interesting discussions have been in areas of capital assets, buildings, equipment. How is that stuff going to be transferred, if at all? Is the city going to maintain ownership, and all those things? Another area, of course, and I know your group has worked on this already, and I think the lines of communication are very open. And I saw this, I think the gentleman that's here from Springfield and Eugene local will share with you that involving the labor group early on so that you break down any potential rumors that aren't, that are detrimental, and getting those people involved early is a key to success. My experience, and again, I'm only speaking from my experience, I'm sure there are horror stories out there if we dug deep enough. My experience coming up as being part of the labor group when we did one of the big mergers at 12 Valley, nobody in the labor group was hurt. Everybody got to keep their jobs. Many people were promoted. People went on for successful retirements, even though there was fears in place when some of those things were going on. And I think that's true if you were to look at things that have gone on since then. I'd be surprised to find out where groups of people were hurt. Individuals, possibly, but generally not groups. But involving the volunteer associations and the labor groups is really important. Rumor control, I kind of talked about that. Another pitfall, and then I'll kind of turn this over again in the interest of time, but another thing that we've seen that worries us from time to time is that people involved in discussing these mergers or consolidations or formation of a new district get real eager to make, because they can see you might say the light at the end of the tunnel, and they don't do a good job of really evaluating what's this going to cost? Where are the hidden costs? Where are the costs that are going to continue to be shared? Can we provide a better service delivery than we're providing today? Generally, those answers are yes, and generally those answers are, we can do it for not necessarily less, but we can do it for what we're doing it for, or with a little increased funding. that's shared then over a larger evaluation, and the service levels do improve. But asking that question and really being aware of what the direct and indirect costs are going forward. Because Rich, I'll share with you in my ending. The fire chief turns in to really a small city manager with only one service delivery. It's no longer the operational fire chief. The fire chief is the manager of a rural fire protection district that provides fire and medical services, but he also has to find somebody to help him with finance, with managing personnel from an HR perspective, and all those services currently are available to you from the city. So it does change the role of the fire chief. Jeff Johnson defined it as he felt more like a city manager than a fire chief, and I kind of agree with that. You're going to hear about some models out there, and I'm really pleased that one of the models that I share with people around the state is the model that went on at the city of Redmond and Deschutes Fire District number 1. The person that was the chief of that organization when that happened is here, and that is definitely one of the success models I've seen. I do want to mention one other success model. When cities are looking at this, the success model of the city of Redmond is definitely I consider a pinnacle one, a real model. But there's also another one out there that's similar. I think the city of Redmond is a little better, but there is one out there, and that's what the city of Beaverton did when they joined 12 Valley Fire and Rescue. That was a tough one. There was a tough mayor in place, a tough city manager, or I think he was called city administrator at the time, or maybe it was a strong mayor form of government. I can't remember exactly. But they did some things there to make that successful, but it also benefited the city long term. So those are two good ones to historically look at. I'm glad that Tim's here to talk about it. I'll leave it at that, Chief.
Thank you, George. I appreciate it. Since you kind of laid the groundwork into Chief Moore, I'll toss the ball to Chief Moore and let him run with it.
Thank you, Chief. Good evening, Mayor, City Council, and staff. It's certainly a privilege to be in front of you tonight. It brought back a lot of memories when Chief Leifert called and asked me to be involved with this. A little bit about me. I was the chief, had the privilege actually of working now for a city fire department, a rural fire district, and now I'm the fire chief in Sun River, and I work for a service district, which is different than both other models. So I've been exposed to all of those. What I wanted to share with you this evening is during my time in Redmond, I was the chief, started out as a city fire chief in 2007. We started the process to become a fire district in 2009 and weren't successful with that endeavor until 2011. So it was a 2-year deal. What I want to share with you tonight is what I think, looking back and also being involved from day one, are 3 really critical areas: the financial formula, the governance, and the district benefits. And I always start out this conversation with educate your elected officials. And I know Chief Leifert has been working with you for a long time on this. Educated elected officials are really, to me, what makes the deal go or it doesn't. I can remember sitting with a particular counselor in Starbucks and going through an entire legal pad trying to explain what a fire district was. So that education piece is really important. The other thing that I'm a firm believer in is doing this, going through this process, completing the due diligence on your own without a consultant. And that is my opinion only. And at Redmond, we had the confidence in the city staff, and we had at the district, we were a small, there was a rural fire district very similar to what you have in McMinnville that was wrapped around our city, and they had a very small staff. But between the city staff and the district staff, we did our financial formula and all of our financial analysis. And the benefit to me and to the district was we didn't have to trust an outside third party. It really started the relationship off good with the city, and we were able to accomplish that. The second thing is, can the city survive without the district, and vice versa? And when a city fire department leaves that city government, you leave a hole. And the hole is in indirects. And the big ones for us were accounting, which included payroll, our IT department, and human resources. The day we became a fire district, we left those behind. And if I remember right, our indirects that we were paying the city when we left was about $550,000 a year. And there was a long, educated discussion about that on both sides before we could even get the council to buy off. Another recommendation is polling, and I don't know where you're at, Chief, but if we did not, this was the only consultant that we used in the entire process, was a consulting firm that did polling out of Portland, and they were recommended to us by Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue. The polling, when we did our original poll to see if the people of Redmond would support this annexation, because what we were doing, the fire district was taking over the city, and that was a huge undertaking for the city council to make that decision. So the people in the city of Redmond had to vote because we were going to change their tax rate. The people in the district didn't have to vote because we weren't changing their tax rate. So we took a poll of the city of Redmond, and the city of Redmond came back and said, we will not support this because we don't trust government. And so we had some touch and go conversations whether we were even going to move forward at that point. And I'd be happy to share with you, it's lengthy, but we came up with, I think, is a very creative process of coming up with 2 ballot measures that reassured the voters of Redmond that their tax rates wouldn't get raised once the merger occurred, which again is a whole nother conversation. But I can't emphasize enough about the importance of polling. And then one of the biggest questions I faced as we went through the entire process was, is everyone going to pay their fair share? And in our situation, and as I always tell people, there is no 2 mergers or annexations that look alike. But in our situation, the merger actually made it fair. But prior to that, the city was spending a lot more money than the district was for the coverage and for the protection. So that's my financial piece, and I'd be happy to answer questions here. I'll go through the governance. The other thing that we did just to make the transition a lot smoother, and we had some crossover services that we had to deal with. So we created an intergovernmental agreement with the city of Redmond. And what was going on there is they were doing all of our vehicle maintenance. They maintained all of the fire hydrants. They did a lot of the fire prevention plan review stuff. And as a fire department, what we didn't want to lose there, I'll just use an example of the water. Water is a huge part of the ISO, the Insurance Services Office, and insurance ratings. So in that IGA, we were very specific that we wanted to maintain that relationship with the city of Redmond to make sure the fire hydrants were in good condition as we move forward. And those are just a couple. I know today the IGA has since went away because there's trust and it's been 9 years. But I know today that we still have an agreement. The city of Redmond still has an agreement with Redmond Fire and Rescue to provide all vehicle maintenance. So don't forget about those things. And then I know you guys have an airport, and we do too in Redmond. And we had a lot of airport agreements and operational responsibilities that, from a merchant standpoint, would have shut that airport down if we didn't maintain that relationship. So think about those things as you separate and move forward, what that looks like as 2 separate entities. The last area that I wanted to touch on is the district benefits and really the security of the city as well. We couldn't have picked a worse time to do this merger. It was 2009 2009, and we were going through a bad economy. And luckily, the district had $1 million in cash, and George touched on that. So we started as a new district with zero debt, but we, reduced those costs also as a new district by not paying the $550,000 in indirects. We outsourced our payroll to ADP for pennies on the dollar. We hired a part-time CFO who worked 2 days a week to do our accounts payable and those types of things. We outsourced our IT, and we became very efficient. I don't know, I was always a big fan of the GE CEO. He just died here recently, and I'm taking a blank. But one of his favorite terms was to delayer government, and essentially we did that with becoming a fire district and became much leaner. We would have never survived the 2009, 2010 economy. We would have probably lost people and shut down if we wouldn't have become a fire district. So I think that's the positive takeaway. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I can talk all night. I know we started late and there's others that want to talk, but is there anything I can help anybody with as we move forward?
I got a question if nobody else does.
Go ahead, Adam.
Tim, Counselor, I'm Garvin here. I was curious, hindsight being 2020, how you guys established your tax rate. I know you talked about going at it from two different angles with two different ballot measures, but I'm also aware that that fire district went out for a 5-year operating levy, basically to just maintain service levels this year. And so have they been operating the last 9 years on just spinning down those cash reserves you talked about, or was there something that changed the dynamic that's why they needed an operating levy and why their tax rate's not sustainable to maintain the service levels?
Great question, Councilor Garvin. And so a little bit about the tax rate. In 2009, when we came to the agreement that we were going to do this, the city of Redmond had a tax rate of $6.16. The tax rate for the fire district at that time was $1.75. So we kept it as simple as possible and said if we were both living off of that 616 before, we need to be able to do that moving forward. And that was a big piece with the voters. So we just simply subtract $1.75 from that 616 that city residents were paying. And the city walked away with a rate of $4.41, and the district moved forward with $1.75. And that's how we came up with that. And plugging that back into the financial formula, it worked. We thought it would only work for about 5 years with growth and all of the other things that we had to take on as a district. But you're very astute. I retired at Redmond Fire in 2018. And this year they went out for an operating levy, and that's the first time in 9 years. So, and it's just simply cost. One of my favorite sayings as a fire chief, in Oregon, I call it the triple threat. It's called PERS, health insurance, and the Oregon tax system. And that's what causes all of us to have to go out for, eventually, you have to go out for an operating levy. And I encourage, that's a great point, Councilor Garvin, is make sure that that rate is high enough and going to sustain, several years to keep you in the operating in the black. But it's difficult. And I thought our rate, we were very diligent and very fiscally responsible for 9 years.
Any other questions for Tim?
Thank you for the explanation. Really appreciate that. I was also curious, did it go for an operating levy instead of trying to raise your tax rate just off of city? I mean, I just can't do it for an operating 3 or 5 years. Do you have any?
Adam, you're,
Masters. I get the.
Adam, you're breaking up significantly. I don't think we can understand the full question.
Okay, I will try and give a little bit better service, and I will come back to that. But go ahead and proceed with somebody else.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions for Tim? Okay, then we can move on. Tim, that was a question I had, is coming back to that agreement that you made with the citizens, because we've heard a number of ways to do that. And I think you hit an innovative way that you can sell it to the community, and there were benefits for all involved.
Yes, and it just brought trust to the surface. And again, without the polling, we probably would have never got there, and we wouldn't have been successful with the merger. But it's still in play today, and the only way the city can increase the $1.75 is go to the voters. And I just was very thankful that the council saw it that way at the time.
Great.
Mr. Mayor, if you're just in the interest of trying to keep on time, if you're okay, we'll move ahead with retired Chief Groves and council member elect, I guess, so, out of Eugene.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, and staff. I too appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm not going to retail some of the same ground that's already been touched on by George and Tim. They actually have more experience with actually forming a district than I do, since that is not the model we have. Ours is more of a shared services model. It's not that we didn't want to have a singular unit, whether it's a fire authority under an ORS 190 or a district. We did what was politically feasible to do, and neither city were interested at the time in breaking off as a district, and we had to do this kind of moving in degrees. But a little bit about my background. I have almost just short of 37 years in the fire service before I retired in 2016. Started in Corvallis as a sleeper. Started in Eugene in 1980 and spent my career there until we actually started the merger process with then Springfield Fire Chief Dennis Murphy. I became chief of Eugene after working my way through the ranks in 2006. And almost immediately, Dennis and I started, how can we have more cooperation between our two agencies? If you look at Eugene and Springfield on a map, we're only separated by I-5, which is a fairly thin stretch of concrete. And if you look at the two cities put together in our station deployment, it almost looks like one city. So we started with that as a basis. We used to have what are known as hard boundaries, which was not in the best interest of our public on either side of the freeway. So that was the first step that we took in trying to build more of a 3-battalion system. Eugene has 11 stations with 2 battalions. Springfield had 1 battalion with 5 stations, combined 16 stations. We also serve rural areas as well. Eugene has 5 contract fire protection districts. Springfield has 3. So collectively, we serve an area of 93 square miles and just over 250,000 population. We're home to the University of Oregon, which adds a fairly good load on top of that. We have a regional Index B airport that we serve. We have a major rail line that runs through our city. I-5, we're bisected by the Willamette River. The two cities share wastewater treatment. So we have a metropolitan wastewater management district that covers the two cities, that's managed by the two cities. My hope is eventually the department will evolve to something like that that's truly a singular entity. But right now we work through a period of years bringing the contracts between our two labor units together, and that was Local 1395 for Springfield and Local 851 with Eugene. They're now combined into Local 851 as a single unit. It took us, what was it, Rodney, 6 years of contracts. Each year we would get a little bit closer. There was a real fear that when we normalized the contracts that it would spike the labor costs. But we looked at, from the fire perspective, at the contract costs. And although each city had over the years incented in different directions, if you took the true cost of the contract, adjusted it for size, there was basically a 1% difference between the cost of the two contracts. So we were able to bring over a 6-year period the contracts into a singular contract, staying within inflationary rates. And I'll tell you, we worked really well with the union. The union was our partner in this, and they really worked hard to make this work. Not because it was in their best interest per se, although it did make our response safer, but because it was in the best interest of our community. We were able to immediately increase our basic response package to immediately dangerous to life and health, IDLH calls for service. Our time on scene went down because we actually had increased the number of firefighters we were sending to fires and some medical emergencies even. And it really made a difference. The big benefit we got from an operational standpoint, and this is where Dennis Murphy and I started from, was looking at how can we deliver a better service for the same or less cost. And it actually improved and decreased our time on scene, which means less property loss. Our firefighters were safer. We don't call mutual aid nearly as often as we used to because until we get to a third alarm fire, we don't need any help. And all this really made for a more robust and better service and gave us some real surge capacity. And 3 examples that are kind of sentinel events that happened shortly after the merger. We had a 4-alarm fire in Springfield, Swanson Mill Fire, that was a major event that was handled much better with having a more robust and commonly equipped and trained response with integrated crews. And then in Eugene, we had 2 large fires. Historic Civic Stadium burned down. It almost burned up College Hill. We had a red flag day that day, so wildland was a real risk. And we had 30, 40-foot flame links that were laying straight across the road and actually scorching property across quite a distance. Again, the merger helped in that matter. And then we had a large bowling alley with a bowstring truss roof that was a total loss, but had a lot of exposures around it. That was also in Eugene. That was another sentinel event that really tested the integrated model that we had. The other thing I want to point out is Eugene Springfield, together, we are the largest public ambulance service in the state. And at the time, our Ambulance Enterprise Fund was feeling extreme stress with Medicare and Medicaid capitation, a large influx of homeless population in our metropolitan area, that we're unable to pay for the services. All this, we were able to shrink our footprint with mostly through attrition, in fact, almost completely through attrition, and ended up saving roughly $2 million a year. Of course, it's a larger system, but that's significant. That's a significant amount of money. I mean, in comparison to a $55 million budget, it's not huge. But I also sit on the budget committee, and I watch us debate $10,000 items for 20 and 30 minutes at times. So $2 million to me is significant. I would say, and I want to get this over to Rodney as quickly as I can here, but the main thing is being able to have a common specification of our equipment, bringing everything in line, having trained to the same standards, and then fully integrating our crews once we had a common contract. So there are Eugene employees, and there's still Eugene employees and Springfield employees, but they are integrated into one system. A few things that we did, though, to try not to spike the cost, because we were right in the middle of the recession when we were doing this, and I do believe the recession actually gave us the fuel to get this first part of the merger done, which is all the operational things. We were able to save a lot in our supply order and distribution system as well. Instead of buying things in individual containers, we started buying products in 55-gallon drums and pallets. And Eugene had built a logistics facility that was basically a warehouse designed to support a fire service agency. So there were a lot of things that we were able to use back and forth and take advantage of. I'll also add that we have state regional hazardous materials that runs out of our department. We also have state USAR, although I know that's changed even more after I retired. And then we have localized water rescue with 2 components for our rivers. But Rodney, do you want to jump in a little bit about the labor management relationship?
Oh, I'll do my very best. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I guess from labor's perspective, as Chief Groves stated, we ventured into this as a basically a 3rd battalion. So we had 1 battalion, Eugene had 2, and we started out with just, how can we train together? We can start running calls together, but that took a little bit of time, and mostly it was just trying to get to know each other. So I think the biggest thing for labor, at least in my opinion, as the president of the smaller union, was, can we trust the chief? Can we trust his administrative staff? Do we believe in the mission? Do we believe in the goals? And is it something that we can sell to the public if they ask us? And I think that the answer to all of those was yes for us. I think it was the biggest change for the Springfield members. Obviously, they were twice as, well, 2/3 bigger than us. And so we had some issues with losing our identity and our traditions and the way we did stuff. But from what Jeff Towery has told me about this, there's not another work group that you guys are going to be trying to bring together. There's maybe some paid chiefs of these other districts or some other staff. We didn't have volunteers, so I can't really speak to that. But for the most part, the lessons that we learned were just the trust of the chief, being involved in it. The labor contract is kind of, everything to us, and that probably took the most time to get those 2 lined up. We had to do a couple 1-year contracts to get on the same expiration as the Eugene contract. And obviously we both, held the chief hostage a couple times for some stuff that we wanted, but ultimately we got there. I think the biggest thing that we could have done better, but really we weren't able to do, and again, it doesn't really work for you guys, is we met with a lawyer out of Portland that told us, the only way you guys are ever going to have the same benefit package is either all of you become City of Eugene employees or all of you become City of Springfield employees. But as someone mentioned earlier, what would that do to the City of Springfield if the 2nd largest work group exited their organization? What would that do to the insurance experience? What would that do to the other things that are built to support the fire department? And we weren't willing to do that, and we still aren't willing to do that. We've looked at it a couple times, but a lot has to go into, what are the downstream effects to the other citizens, the other employees of the municipality that you belong to, and how many FTEs are going to be lost that supported the fire department within HR, within IT, even within public works. So those are kind of things that we didn't necessarily have to deal with that you may or may not have to deal with what you guys are trying to do. But more than anything, labor has to believe in the fire chief, and the fire chief has to engage and involve them in everything, or it's going to be really hard to take them along if they're kicking and screaming. So that's really all I have to say on that. Thank you.
And we never made it personal. I mean, it was always business. I think everybody conducted themselves professionally, and we were concerned about both cities. It's in fact, at times it almost felt like we were the traffic cop in between the 2 cities, because we talked with the cities more than they talked with each other, and that's just kind of the way it's been. I will add, as far as being held hostage, I was a labor leader in fire for over 10 years, so I certainly understand the system and how it works. I respect the process. And we just worked very hard to find common ground, work towards what the best interest and welfare of our public, and we kept coming back to that, and that helped keep us grounded through the whole process. And even though our path sounds very different to what McMinnville's looking for, I still think there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from the process. that may be of benefit to you. But with all that said, I would definitely say and support what George said, that Chief Moor's model in Redmond is probably the gold standard as far as looking at it as a fire service entity by itself and what's going to best serve that service. So that's, I don't know if you have any questions for Rodney and me, and I'll kind of present us as a team on this since we had the common experience.
Thank you, Randy. So we'll open it up and see if any counselors have questions of Randy or Rodney. Hearing none, then I'll go back to Adam, because I think, Adam, you had a second question for George when your connectivity went out. There you go.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Could you hear me any better, Mayor?
Yep, sounds great.
Okay. I guess before I go back to Tim, I do have one quick follow-up question for the Eugene Springfield Chiefs. Do you guys foresee ever getting past the agreement you guys have right now and forming a full district, or for the foreseeable future, what you guys are doing works for you and that's just kind of the model you guys are going with?
Well, when I retired in 2016, my hope was that they would continue. We basically, under my watch, took care of all the operational issues, merging of the contracts, bringing the two workforces into a common system. I don't know, Rodney, I'll let you weigh in on this. It felt like about 80% of it was done. And then the last part is answering the question of governance. But even if it stays a shared service, right now there's two reporting systems. There's two separate budget processes. We go through a City of Eugene budget process concurrently with the City of Springfield budget process. And it just doesn't feel like there's a real good connectivity between the cities. It's something that, the chief goes back and forth, and it is not the most efficient model. We're hoping that it takes that next step. And I think there's a number of forms of governance that can get you there. I mean, I think we were most familiar in the state of Oregon with districts, but no, it still needs to continue to evolve. And I was very hopeful that would happen within the first 2 years of my retirement, and it just didn't. So we'll see if there's a way to help that along in my new role.
From a dollar and cents perspective, is one of those cities operating, putting more money in to maintain their service levels than the other? Is it like closing the gap that's the issue, or it's just the political will of both those districts?
Political will of both cities. I mean, Eugene puts in more money, but it also, it has a population of 172,000 people in Eugene, and it's just over 60,000 in Springfield. And then, like I said, we have our 8 contract districts that, although they weren't at the table in discussing the merger because they contract for service with the 2 cities, there was still some massaging that had to go on with that, and they needed to be kept in the loop as well because, anything that we do structurally could potentially have an impact on them. Now, they would like to see us go to a district and then the 8 of them fold into our district. But I don't know if the will is going to be there in the 2 cities. And Jeff could probably answer that as well as anyone, having been with city management. But you know what I'm talking about, Jeff.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. And I wasn't meaning like a total dollar amount. I was meaning more like tax rate wise, like is Eugene at $1.80 and Springfield's at $1.53, and that's why they just can't get together? Or?
No, it's not broken down like that between the cities. The millage is for the cities, and then we have a budget carved out of that. Again, it's about a 2/3, 1/3. I would say Eugene probably is a little higher percentage, but there's some very expensive facilities on the Eugene side.
Okay, thank you. And my question for Tammy, you guys answered in follow-up, so I'm good with that, and I appreciate all your guys' insight so far tonight.
Other questions?
Can I ask something? I'm just curious, Randy. I have the impression that because you had certain facilities and Springfield had certain facilities and it was just really working well, did you reach the efficiencies, at least as far as financially, that Redmond is talking about?
I think we hit really good efficiency. Again, you know, being able to reduce some of our most expensive employees in overhead. I mean, we no longer needed 2 chiefs, and actually Dennis and I both offered to put our badge on the table. And Dennis was a little older than I am, so he ended up being the one to go. He said he was planning on retiring the next year anyway. But I mean, you play that through. I mean, you don't need 2 EMS chiefs. You don't need 2 training chiefs. So there were a lot of positions that we were able to eliminate, and most of it through attrition. I mean, we dropped from about, I want to say we were about 325 to begin with, to just over 300. And but also, again, the supply order and distribution, a real interesting thing happened when we started this process. All of a sudden, all of our providers are started calling up and wanting to renegotiate their contracts because they're afraid we'd be looking elsewhere. And we actually cut a better deal. Springfield used to go and buy like a bottle of Windex with the fire engine at the Bi-Mart with a purchasing card. And now we buy it in a 55-gallon drum. I mean, it's pennies per bottle instead of dollars. And, you know, all of that adds up. You know, we had to come and agree on a common specification of equipment. So there was a whole process with that as well. But no, I think we ended up in a better place. I think we ended up with actually even some better equipment than what was there originally.
Have you, either of you had to go out for levies or anything?
Springfield has a rolling levy for one of their stations that was in place prior to the merger, but it's always received good support. It feels like every time we go out, it gets cut back further, and it makes it harder to make ends meet. But you know, I'm gonna try and stay out of the politics on that end of it. But that was a little concerning. It just seemed like we're constantly stretching the rubber band. But you know, we're making ends meet. Springfield does not have the tax base Eugene does. But Eugene also has a lot of government property, including the University of Oregon. It's kind of like the Vatican. It's its own little entity that we don't derive any tax revenue from, but we still have to support it.
Are the cities happy with this arrangement? I mean, I mean, we're paying a lot for fire coming out of our general fund.
Sure.
Assuming that monies have been, it's more efficient.
Yes.
And economy scale have helped.
It's more efficient. One of the things I probably should have mentioned, if I were given $1 for every time somebody came up to me at a public event or on the street and thanked us for trying this. And in the early days, people would come up and thank us for trying. It's that even if it doesn't work, thank you for trying to do something different. It just feels like government's always just the status quo, and it just keeps rolling along without any innovations and changes. And they appreciated that we were willing to take a risk and do this. And, you know, the union leaders, they basically put their union positions on the line. If this went badly, they'd be unelected. Dennis Murphy and I put our careers on the line for this, but we believed in it. We believe it's the right thing to do. I applaud you for looking at this. Just know that it's not easy. This is not for the faint of heart. And Tim's laughing, and he knows what I mean. So does George. But it's a grind. And there were a period of years I wasn't sure whether we were going to make it or not. It's kind of like leaning back in your chair and catching yourself at the last minute before you fall over. It was like that every day. And it's draining after a while, especially in the Eugene Springfield area. We have a very politically charged environment.
I will add to that a little bit. at the time, everything possible could go wrong with our merger. It did, right down to our city manager leaving in the middle of the process, who supported it. And the council appointed, and this is kind of a funny story, I like to think of it as a funny story. The council appointed the HR director to be the interim city manager. And at the time, the city of Redmond had 3 unions, had Public Works, Police, and Fire. And quite frankly, I think she pulled some strings, and she was able to get rid of 1 union. That's what I always tell people was really our success at the end of the day. They didn't have to deal with the fire union anymore. But again, I can't say again how the importance of the association made our deal happen. They were out knocking on doors, but the city has recovered. I don't think they ever struggled when we left, but they are very successful today. The relationship is good, and again, the Redmond Fire and Rescue wouldn't be where it's at today without this merger.
So how did you manage the labor? How did you get everybody, yeah, we want to do this, and go out and knock doors for you? Because we're having some issues.
Well, first of all, labor was at, again, I think partnership is the right word. And I'm a firm believer any successful organization and fire chief has a good relationship with the association. In our case, there was a little bit of selfishness too. They knew that leaving the city and going to a district, there's a single focus. You no longer have to compete with Public Works and police and tight budgets in the city. And that was, a huge focus for our association. And they were more than willing. I mean, they set up a pack for, going out and buying signs. And you just got to create that partnership and that relationship and show them the benefits. It's kind of like what I talked about earlier of educating your elected officials. And, the State Firefighters Council can certainly help with some of those issues, I would think. But, our association, we were together through this whole thing, and they were very positive.
I'll add too, we had 4 unions in the fire department, but we talked about the recession coming along, and that was kind of the impetus of getting this through. I am saying this with absolute certainty that with the recession, had we not saved the money that we saved with the merger, there would be 1 less station on the Springfield side and 1 less station on the Eugene side.
Us too. Yeah, we would have lost a station.
Mr. Mayor, may I?
Go ahead, Rennie.
Thank you. This question is really actually for our chief and city manager. Since there was this recurring theme of talking about the direct and indirect costs, hidden costs, and it kind of flowed through all the way from where we're starting in terms of debt, but then also handling this new entity of and everything that goes along with it, from HR to finance to IT. I'm and possibility of, or potentially having an IGA with the city to supply or doing that independently. I'm wondering if we can just hear a little bit from both our chief and our city manager on those points.
So I'll jump in first. Thanks, Councilor Grabkin. I mean, I'm not going to suggest that it's a simple approach. There's a lot of moving parts when you talk about a project like this. I will say that if we have time, I'd be interested in Rodney and Randy addressing the issue of being able to bring the bargaining units along. My recollection was the bargaining units were all in for a district and sort of lukewarm on the idea of a consolidation of services. And it was, there were a lot of conversations about, well, why wouldn't we just do a district if we can? Why are we going to do this other sort of hybrid? And we took a more complicated approach. And again, Randy's right. It was really driven by the politics of the locality. I think one of the things that makes this process simpler is we really are dealing with one career fire service and one city that has one way of doing overhead, one way of providing a set of benefits. The small cities and the rural districts that we're dealing with are a little bit more basic in terms of the systems that they bring to bear, less complexity. The two cities of Eugene and Springfield had, again, different central service models, different overhead functions, different sets of benefits, different standards for how we did things, different purchasing standards, different purchasing rules. And so we had to navigate a lot of back of house kind of operations. I think we spent 6 months just trying to get all the HR people on the same page. Even after the fire folks were on the same page, it took a long time to get HR to talk the same language. It took almost as long on the finance side because each operation had a different way to do purchase orders and a different way to do budgets. It's a lot more straightforward here because we're really talking about the city of McMinnville has the complex, robust systems to the extent that they are, and it's going to be a lot easier to navigate that transition, I think, to some different model. And again, we're not presuming what that model looks like just yet. I have a sense that a district's going to be one of the reasonable options that we consider, and we don't really have the competition that maybe existed in Eugene Springfield where, well, we like this HR group and we like this IT group and we like this finance group and we want this benefit package. And for us, if we're a provider of some of those services, it's sort of us or something new. And so you don't really have the push and the pull about, I've got a favorite payroll clerk, but my favorite payroll clerk isn't the same as Rodney's favorite payroll clerk. I just think it will be complicated, but not sort of three-dimensional chess complicated the way Eugene Springfield was at some points. Rich?
As far as the indirects, we're a little bit different than Redmond is as far as our indirects. The direct allocations that come out of our budget are specific to IS. When we had the ambulance enterprise fund, prior to merging it into the fire department budget, there were indirects of about $225,000 specific for support from admin. Those have been absorbed by general fund, for lack of a better term, when we rolled those into the funds. So there is a $225,000 cost out there for indirects that used to be allocated to ambulance. And off the top of my head, I think it's about $60,000 or $80,000 for IS and fire. So the cash that Chief Moore experienced requirement from the city transition is a little bit different here in McMinnville than it was in Redmond. And as far as the other, I'm sorry, Councilor Drapkin, your other question was about the indirects and what else?
It was just kind of addressing the whole potential flow through from where our jumping off point would be financially, right, to how we would potentially manage financial changes in terms of those directs and indirects, and also kind of looping in the potential IGA with that, and just how you see that playing out.
The simple solution for the expediency of the process would be a contract with the city of McMinnville to continue until we have the opportunity to evaluate other options. And that would be the simplest method if we have the district created and McMinnville is still available and willing to entertain the IGA until we can make the move to do some of the other things. Because a lot of the things that we're using with the city of McMinnville, our payroll system, our finance system, are proprietary systems that are software proprietary, not specifically payroll proprietary, but software proprietary. So we'd have to find a mechanism to, if the new board wanted to move in a different direction, then we'd have to find a method to transition to either contract companies or those types of industries. So there would be probably an overlap. And Chief Moore, I don't know how long your overlap was for your transition. Some of it you have pre-set up, but some of it may be a year or so you stick with an existing before you get to move. George, either one of you have those kind of answers?
We administratively cut the ties immediately.
Okay.
Yeah. And we had to do that for the health of the organization moving forward and make that separation, or you might not ever do it, was kind of our take on that.
And then also for our looking internally for our city to respond for our chief and city manager, when we're Chief Moore especially brought up the importance of polling and of both residents, but also of our fire teams specifically. And can you address that? Maybe Jeff, could you address how we could begin that process?
Yes, when we get the report from the consultant here in another month or so, they'll lay out a couple of options and paths forward. There'll be an engagement with all of the elected officials of the affected entities. There may or may not be some sort of consensus that evolves out of that process, but once we decide which options are worthy of consideration, I think one of the approaches that we would want to take is probably sometime this fall or maybe early winter to do some community polling in the affected jurisdictions and find out where people are. What questions do they have? What support, what items do they support? Where they not support? Where they need to know more about? Spend the next several months answering those questions, sort of refining a direction, and then prior to anything going on the ballot, probably poll again in probably late spring, early summer of next year. That's presuming a target for a November 21 election, which is one of the options that we think you'll see. So I would see some polling probably later this calendar year, another round of polling that's more refined on a specific proposal in the spring or the summer that helps the council and the other policy bodies to decide what sort of ballot measures to put forward. And then there might even be some follow-up polling prior to the election to help inform any campaign work that's done.
And would that polling be something that we would be prepared to do internally and that would already be budgeted for, or would that be bringing in another consultant or outside firm?
We bring in a polling firm and we have resources budgeted.
In the past, when we've done stuff like this, where, we were trying to make a determination, we did at least one polling to make sure everybody, when we did the transportation bond, we had a series of polls over several years, and there was a high indication they were very interested in transportation before we even took the step.
Right, that was the customer service surveys that we had. Zach, go ahead.
Thank you. A couple quick questions. One, for both parties with their perspective. What was at the time of these things, what was the equipment building infrastructure like, and how much of that was needed as upgrades? We're looking at a aged, failing facility and a fleet with a lot of work. And so there's that piece that's also in the discussion. What was the conditions of each of your guys' departments and maybe other departments, and how was that in your calculus in both of these processes? Something I haven't heard talked about. I heard a lot about labor, not necessarily about infrastructure or equipment. So if you guys could both help me.
That's an excellent question, and I actually had it here in my notes. So when we made the separation, the fire district owned every fire engine but one, and the fire district owned 2 of our 4 fire stations. So we had just moved into a brand new station downtown Redmond that the city owned, and it became contentious for a short while, and we got both the board and the city council together and said, let's walk through this. This is where government gets a bad name. And at the end of that conversation, I'll just keep it simple, is what we said is on the day of, it was July 1st of 2011 when we became a district. On June 30th, those buildings belonged to the same people, the voters of the tax district, both in the district and the city, and they serve both. What's going to change tomorrow? And that was our mentality. So there was a no cash exchange. We just transferred the ownership through administratively, administratively transitioned the city fire stations to the district, and we were over. We eventually refinanced the downtown station because the district was able to get a better deal. So we did not, there was no financial transactions whatsoever with our buildings or our apparatus because they were still serving the same people. And, you know, they were all, there was one station that was being replaced during the process, but it was very smooth. And again, I think that's something you should have an agreement on as you move into that.
We had, for Eugene Springfield, we had a professional assessment done on all the infrastructure, the buildings, and the apparatus. But the reality is Springfield took care of everything east of I-5. Eugene took care of everything west of I-5. On the Springfield side, we had some problem with apparatus that were failing. There were marginal equipment that were purchased. That all got corrected for the future, and now it's you know, we're getting a full 15-year life cycle out of you know, a pumper and a truck, and that just wasn't happening before. And Rodney's smiling over there. So that was one piece, but again, that didn't transition from one city to the other, as each city took care of their own assets under the shared services agreement.
Thanks. I'm not an expert firefighter, and I mean, you guys have gone through big efforts, and it sounds like they were great. So I'm not trying to undercut it, but it sounds like what you guys were both able to do in your examples were, again, not simplifying it, those sound like very difficult tasks, but sort of merge two teams into one big team and able to provide a better service model to your people. To me, I guess that was maybe what I was kind of getting at in the equipment and facilities question is we've got some of that you guys were solving, but we also have, I don't see a way that we just sort of all wear the same jerseys and have the same logo on our fire departments. And again, I'm not oversimplifying it, but I'm not trying to, but it seems like we have a different nut to crack. And maybe that's just something that we also have to keep in mind as we move forward. But I see us needing more of drawing a huge circle if we get all the people that we want in, and being more deliberate about, okay, we need places here and we need things here. And it sounds like it's an additional lift I feel like we have to make. And I don't know if you have any insights into that or any examples of sort of reassessing how effectively you guys were going to be able to do that, and if any capital infrastructure was needed for that.
Well, and Rich can talk about the details, but the consultant study we're working on will address items like station placement, equipment, staffing.
Yeah, we didn't need to do any redeployment work. Eugene had done some extensive redeployment work, and that's why the facilities were all in good shape, because quite a few of them were brand new stations. And if they weren't brand new, they were recently remodeled with seismic upgrade. So yeah, the consultant's report for us came back that everything was right where it should be. But I mean, we knew that going into it. We just wanted it verified.
And we've run out of time. We've got a minute left. Would our guests, can we reach out to each of you if we have further questions and follow up with specific questions?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Could I add one thing, Mayor?
Go ahead.
Mr. Geary, if I pronounce that right, his question, there's all kinds of examples out there. We've had two great examples given what went on in Eugene, Springfield, and what the city of Redmond and Deschutes Rural Fire Protection District. As I told you when I started, I think those are both great models. But for the type of things that Commissioner Geary brought up, there are uniquenesses in every organization that has approached something like this. And we can find an example similar to yours. You know, so you're not going to have to recreate as much as you think. You can look at other people's mistakes and learn from that. They're out there.
Great. Well, we thank those that have come to just, you know, part of an important piece of working with the councils is our learning. And tonight has been a great opportunity for us to hear some success stories of individuals that have walked in the shoes and know really what it's like. And so we appreciate that so much. Jeff, thank you for putting that together. And Chief, thank you for the collectiveness of who you know and who you brought to the table. I think that we've had a great discussion this evening. Good questions asked, answers that have been given, but know that each of us are unique and that there can be examples to be found to help us through some of those tough things. Chief, I'm going to turn it over to you. Anything that you'd like to say in closing?
I would just very much like to say thank you to the gentlemen this evening that were here to help us through this process. A big part of what we're trying to accomplish is education from all aspects, and this is one step in the process. Councilor Drapkin, we do have money in our budget for the polling for this budget year, so just so you're aware of that. And again, thank you to our subject matter experts who have lived this and come out the backside, and looks like no worse for the wear. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. It's much appreciated.
Anytime.
Good job, anytime. Yep.
Whatever we can do to help.
It is 7 o'clock, and maybe we take 4 minutes for that, for our guests to drop off. And if counselors need to get something to drink or just even stand up, let's take about 4 minutes, and we'll start at 7:05.
Randy, go Ducks! Go Ducks!